Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about Total War Pharaoh, for which Creative Assembly has released some campaign footage as Ramses III in the early game. And if it wasn't already clear that this is basically a continuation of a Total War Saga Troy, then this should make it very, very clear because it is quite obvious that they're reusing a lot of the same mechanics. Like the resource system is the same, the building system is different, interestingly enough, but the trading system is the same, the diplomacy system is the same. There are differences, of course. This is basically though what Troy kind of already is in the historical mode of it, because they did add a historical mode for free after the release of Mythos. Now, some people have started speculating that what Creative Assembly might consider doing with Pharaoh and with Troy is maybe make a combined map between the two of them, which isn't as crazy as you might think it is if they go with the historical mode of Troy. But of course, keep in mind there are some fairly substantial differences between Troy and Pharaoh, at least in terms of the campaign mechanics and of course in terms of the battle mechanics. But if they're just basically gonna port the Legendary Lords and the map from Troy into Pharaoh, well, that could potentially work. But I think also there's a strong argument to be made that Troy failed. And is there any real value for Creative Assembly at this particular point to just decide, okay, we're going to put in all that effort in a mode in order to combine the maps? Is there any real value? Like, there is a lot of value in Warhammer, to be very clear on that, because people liked Warhammer 1, 2, and 3. Like, they were some of the best-selling games that Creative Assembly made. Now, let's talk a bit about some of the things we did see as part of this campaign preview. Now, one of the first things to draw attention to is the research tree. So, it seems that, like in Free Kingdoms, as well as some other Total War games, that certain buildings are going to be locked behind research. Now, the research tree is apparently going to be called the exact same way, Royal Decree, as it was in Troy, but the effects are different. However, certain buildings, as we could see as part of the video, certain buildings are locked behind research. Now, I'm generally not fond of this. The reason I'm not so fond of it is because, usually speaking, in a campaign, you always want to prioritize the things that are most useful to you. So if something's not the most useful, you're not going to bother with it in general in a campaign, and it kind of creates a frustration where you've just got things locked off by research for which there is no way to improve the speed. Though it did seem like the research was passed, so maybe it is just a question of like, okay, you have some early game decisions to make, but later on you can unlock everything. I find like in something like Shogun 2 or Fairy Kingdoms that I was fairly frustrated by how limited I was in terms of the research. Like, yeah, I could go down a certain path. Another thing I would want to mention over here, and I think this is actually important, when we look at the building browser, we could see a couple of things. First off, we could see that, well, Ramses did have what you could consider a tier 3 capital and a tier 2 settlement. So you do actually have a higher tier as a start for the campaign. On top of that, though, he had, for the minor settlements at the very least, he had all of the building slots unlocked when he captured territory. So at this particular point, about 7 minutes in, we can see that they've captured all of the minor settlements in the North Sinai province, and he's got all the building slots over there. Now, I think this is a great decision by Creative Assembly, because it's always annoying, like in Warhammer, where you capture a province at tier 1 and you have limited building slots. But if the situation here is that, okay, you've captured a province, you can build whatever you want, but it depends on the resources you have, I think that's a lot more flexibility and freedom on the campaign map than we've had before, which is a great and welcome change compared to the system that we've had in virtually every Total War for a fairly long time now. Speaking about buildings, we got to see quite a lot of what is actually available in a particular settlement. So you have resource buildings, but there only seem to be a handful of resource buildings. Most of the time, you're just going to build military or management buildings in these minor settlements. It seems we're avoiding the situation in Troy where we would just build like 3 different resource buildings in every settlement. And what's also interesting is that they're going over this system of outposts. So outposts are fortresses. So it seems like we are going back to a system that we haven't had since Medieval 2, where you do have these fortresses at strategic points in a province. Now, you can build them in different ways. You can go for military outposts, you can go for administrative outposts, you can get various benefits in your campaign. And it seems like you're going to want to build these, not just because they're strong points, which will help you out with things like the desert attrition and the economy, but also things like legitimacy. Apparently, legitimacy is going to be a fairly important thing as you're looking to become the legitimate ruler of Egypt or other places in the campaign. Speaking about the campaign map, we didn't quite get to see as much of a glimpse of it as I would have liked, but it does seem it is focusing on Egypt heavily as expected, but also what is modern day Israel, maybe all of modern day Israel, maybe even like Jordan and Syria. But we only saw a limited glimpse of the campaign map as it currently is. One of the things I did like is when they showed the sieges, and it seems like you can at least construct siege equipment relatively quickly, though you are still going to spend a turn building up that siege equipment before you're going to be able to attack. See, the problem with sieges is that you want, as a player in terms of the campaign situation, you obviously want to take settlements as quickly as possible. You don't have time to waste on the campaign map. You want to take things quickly, and you're just not going to spend 3+ turns to build massive siege equipment. You could if it is a heavily fortified settlement, and it might be worth it. But otherwise, you're just going to build like 1 or 2 rams or some ladders. So generally, I would not bother with the ladders. For all the discussion that's been had about ladders for a fairly long time in the Total War community, I think like ladders have never really mattered for a long time, because sending units on ladders is generally a death sentence. And we also got to see some unit recruitment, though it does seem to be fairly limited early on. And then there was the character customization in terms of how you level up characters. Like, you level them up in a system called competences. And we had a red line, a green line, a blue line by the looks of it. And the red line is obviously focused on the army. The green line it seemed to be focused on replenishment. Or I could be wrong on that. Maybe the green line is the army one. The red line is more like combat skills, and the blue line is, campaign effects. You also get various titles that can give you certain benefits depending on how many points you've spent in a particular competence. In a particular competence, like you need a certain number of points and competences in order to unlock some of these titles, which will give you various effects. I do like what I see in terms of the campaign situation. Battle-wise, I'm not too impressed. But then again, it is certainly a struggle for Creative Assembly at the moment to make, and it has been for a while now, to make battles very interesting tactically. I do like the fact that it seems like the battlefields, open field battles, are less open plains as we currently see right now in like Warhammer 3. Like, a lot of the battlefields are just missing that diversity of terrain, and it seems they're focusing on that diversity of terrain. Minor settlement battles are similar to Troy, so yeah, this is basically Troy 2.0, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but at the same time, let's not kid ourselves. This is a Saga game without the Saga name, and it's overpriced, as people have pointed out. I am kind of curious to see I'd be really curious to know what kind of budget they have behind this game, because if they have a full budget, okay, that's great. But if they're making this with the same budget as a regular Saga game would have, and they're charging as much as they are, yeah, that's not a great situation. And it, goes back to the point about the pricing of the Cast Dwarf DLC for Warhammer 3. Prices have gone up. But we'll see how this pans out. So far, so good. Just don't expect it to be something it's not. If you're hoping it's going to redefine Total War, if you're hoping that it's anything more than what we already know it is, which is basically an expansion, so to speak, or a sequel to Troy, then yeah, if that's fine with you, okay. If, however, you expect more, be prepared to be disappointed. Costinho here signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.